Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is the woman behind the story, behind an NGO called Katha. Her work with Katha has helped bring diverse strands of Indian writing in translations to thousands of people across the country and across the world. She's taken her passion and her commitment to storytelling into realms of education, into working with children, and a whole host of literary and academic enterprises. I'm delighted to welcome Geeta Dharmarajan. Geeta, you started Katha story. Why is a story so important? What is the significance of storytelling?
India is a land of stories. We've always listened to stories, we've told stories. That's the way I think, right from the time, if you look at the Bharata Natya Shastra, for instance, and the way the story was used to take the bigger ideas to people. I think, right from them, and we are talking about the 1st century BC maybe, or the 2nd century BC to the 2nd century AD, when the story became a very important way of entertaining people. And the Natya Shastra says that it should be entertaining, it should please the people, and that has been the major objective of all stories, that they should please. And after that we come, maybe they should educate, maybe they should do other things, but first and foremost the pleasing, the thing of taking pleasure. And somehow the story which I have heard as a child, and the many times that I've gone to temples and listened to stories with grandparents and with aunts and uncles and people living in our street, walking back in the middle of the night maybe, discussing, why did Rama do this and why didn't Sita do this? And it's always been a kind of a very slow assimilation of knowledge, which didn't look like knowledge being assimilated. It wasn't as if you were being spoon-fed. Somehow the story seemed a very fun way of doing things, and so Katha.
So amongst the many things that you do in Katha, and I hope we will have time to talk about at least a substantial number of them, is that you have looked to promote stories in different languages through good, high-quality translations, so that they didn't remain preserves of just the communities in which they originated, but were widely disseminated. And it primarily happens in English. It's interesting that you should make an initiative like this at a time when the art of storytelling per se is declining, whether it's television serials or it's movies or whatever. We've just lost the art of telling a story well. We always seem to be looking for some element of complexity, a profound social message, while some of the greatest stories are really just simple stories, well told. So what is the challenge, the goal, the objective of your striving? Because Katha is really working predominantly with short stories, as opposed to novels or other longer pieces of literature.
I think we believe that the genius of India lies in the short story. I think we see the Mahabharata, we see the Ramayana, we see the many ways in which the folk story is told and retold as coming in the form of the short story, and that's why Katha has been looking at the short story. But it's interesting what you say about the way in which storytelling is declining, or it seems to be declining in the world today and in India in particular. When I look around and I look at people standing in bus stops, when I look at the CEOs of companies talking to one another, when they are relaxed, they're telling stories. I don't see them, I see each one of us as a storyteller. And whether I'm a lawyer, whether I'm a doctor, if I tell a good story, then I have more patience, or I'm able to communicate what I'm feeling to my patient or to the judge or to my clients. So the story and how it is told, I think, is something that is inherent in each human being. It's like music, when you hear music, you nod your head, your leg beats, and I think the story is something which goes inside you and stays, and makes you feel, it sort of aerates all those little grey cells inside your head, I think, which gets clogged up many times.
Well, it's a question that I wish no one would ever ask me about sort of, the aspects that I work in. But, what is a good story? What are some of the elements? I mean, I know, difficult to articulate, but what would be your sense of it?
I think a good story is one that does not pretend to be a story. It doesn't pretend, it is not artificial. It comes right from the gut. It is told with a vigor which is not simulated, which is not artificial, which is not copied. So there is a genius, there is a creativity that is, and it comes from, I think, the depth of one's whole being. Unless you tear your gut, I think, and you put a little prayer into every little strand of the story and every little word that you're putting in over there, it's not going to be a good story. So you can always make out what is fake and what is real. That's why I think they say that, there can be no charlatanism in literature, because you'll be caught out. And if you're, and I think whether you're writing it in poetry, you're writing it as prose, you're writing it as a narrative, as a play, I think a good story always identifies itself quietly, and therefore I think the audience or the reader identifies with it. So the whole thing of rasa and the building up of rasa brings you the rasikas for the story, and I think that makes a good story.
I think it's in some ways it's a shame that we're always looking for a measurable value that we can ascribe to something, including the work of Katha. I guess when you go to NGO, when you go to donor agencies and the predicaments of most voluntary agencies, I hate the word NGOs, is really what are you doing and why are you doing it, and there needs to be a grand design and a grand purpose. So if I were to ask you what this grand design is, what would you say?
I don't think revolutions can be created. I don't think grand designs can be designed. I don't think ours is a grand design. I think it's very simple. I think there is a plot. There is the Katha Beach. There is a storyline. There are characters. And there are the readers. And I think together we are trying to do something which is present to the moment. We are trying to do something which will bring a larger good.
So tell us the story of Katha.
You want the whole thing?
No, that would take too long.
No.
But just the brief essence for you, of the story of Katha. There are many layers that that we would applaud and say that, look, this is making available literature from diverse Indian traditions, and at a time when issues of diversity are so strong and important for India, it makes a very valuable contribution. It enables us to live vicariously as other people in India live. But then now I'm doing your job. So what are some of the sort of the aspirations for what you're doing, and then we'll talk about how you're doing it.
Okay. I think first and foremost, I would say that the story is, as you said, a little nugget. It is a little seed which carries the culture, which carries the diversity in it. I think every time a story comes from a different region, it brings along with it the scent and the smell, the flavors of that backyard. So I like the story for that reason. I think also today in a globalized world, when we are talking about English being the only language which will be spoken, and we are doing this conversation in English now, it is an important language. It's one of the Indian languages. But when you hear that it could erase other languages, again I think story as part of a linguistic storehouse, part of something which signifies the linguistic map of India, which is very exciting. I think then it acquires a new meaning to it. When we say that the story has in it forgotten cultures, if you look at a tribal story, for a story which comes from tribal people, then you know that it's a culture which is now trapped in politics, when we talk about the Dalits, we talk about Adivasis or the tribal people, we are constantly looking at the politics of it. We are not looking at what is it that is the literary content of what they are saying. We are not looking at the beat, we are not looking at the rhythm, we are not looking at the nuances, we are not reading between the lines. It seems like everything has to be there in black and white. And what the story tells us is that don't just take the black and the white, look at what's beyond and what's behind and read that. So the closer we read the story, the deeper we read the story, the more meaning we get.
In a sense, though, that because you're translating from again a word that I'm very uncomfortable with, regional languages, and I wonder if there's a better word for that. From the base of the pyramid, it's sort of going upwards to the English language, the apex of it, and I don't mean apex in terms of any superiority in the language, just that it's the language of the elites. But have you looked at sort of a more lateral process of translation, sort of diversity issues and understanding of diversity that is disseminated more laterally between languages?
Yes, in fact, Rajiv, that's been happening in two different ways, because at one end we have people, for instance in Malayalam, M.T. Vasudevan Nair reads a story which is a Telugu story, and if you really look at it, they are sharing borders, but he reads it in Katha and then he picks it up and makes a film out of it. Oriya writer who's writing in Oriya is not picked up by his publishers, but is picked up because it's won the story has won a Katha award, and then it gets picked up in a neighboring language for translation. So you find that quite a few of our stories have crossed the boundaries of the state boundaries and linguistic boundaries to reach beyond, which has nothing to do with Katha being the Mula Karta.
The story of Katha beyond the story. And we'd only just begun talking about the institutions where you're working at and looking at the more nitty-gritty issues of translation, of how that texture of a community, of a society can translate into another language. And now you're telling me that, in fact, then English becomes a bridge where people from another linguistic group access what has been produced by one linguistic group. So what are some of the common challenges, or the common is not a good word, and I'm very conscious about words when I'm talking to a publisher, but what are the major challenges that translation confronts?
Translation comes up with a lot of challenges, right from the choice of stories. When, for instance, you're sitting in Europe and you choose a story, you're looking at one language. Here we are looking at, Katha is looking at 21 languages. So when the story comes in, it cannot be, you do not know the quality of it. You cannot read all the languages. So it means translation, it means spending money, it means friends of Katha, and we have so many generous friends of Katha who come in, who donate of their time, of their enthusiasm, of their passion for language. So we get the story chosen. So that itself, I think, is a major challenge that India faces, which can be seen either as something that pulls us down or as something which is really invigorating and something that we need to really have and keep as well as we can. When you're really looking at, how do you take a word and how do you translate it, you cannot listen to theory, because then it doesn't work. I mean, nothing seems to work. So I think the other challenges of finding the right word, of being able to tread a middle path, so that you are neither favoring the writer, not favoring the reader, not saying leave out everything so that the reader can read, not saying keep everything and let the reader do whatever he or she pleases. We are not talking of that. We are talking of a middle road, and that the middle voice, I think, is difficult to maintain and with excellence. The other major challenge that I really think as translators we face and as publishers of translation we face is the way the market looks at us. You go to a bookshop, you'll see that it's easy to find a Coma or a book by whoever is the latest
Sidney
writer.
Sheldon or whoever, yes.
You'll find them and you can stand there and very comfortably you can look at the book. But if you want to buy a translation, then you have to be kneeling down or you have to be craning your neck and looking up, because it's not given the spot of choice in a bookshop, because not many people are buying them. Somewhere I think this goes back to the lack of confidence we have in ourselves, in our own writings, in our own storytelling techniques, because when we read in English, we are so much more familiar with a foreign storytelling technique than what we do. Because you find that when you are writing as an outsider, then you are describing everything. I would describe everything about the way you are sitting, the coat you're wearing.
You make me nervous.
That's what writers do. But then when an Indian writer is writing for, a Malayali writer is writing in Malayalam for her audience, then she is not going to be describing everything. She is going to leave a lot of it unsaid. And the unsaid today creates a problem, because you see, it does not follow a Western storytelling technique. So the Indian storytelling technique, which is coming from the oral, somewhere gets lost, because in the oral I'm looking at you and I'm saying, okay, Rajiv is getting a little tired now, or Rajiv is not understanding my point, so I'll have to repeat
Goodness,
this
how can you say that? I am.
You're with me right through. But you know, that's what happens with storytelling. You know, constantly I'm in touch with my audience, with my listener. And when you are writing it out, you are not really in touch. So you have to have the reader, you have to carry the reader with you.
In fact, you're such a wonderful storyteller that I'd like to just stay with this story, but let's move to chapter 2. And that is that you have taken your work to other areas, and you've been feeling, and you feel very passionately about issues of education, and you have started several schools and efforts and strategies to educate working children. You've started education in tribal communities. Where was the connection? What prompted this? What is sort of unique and special about a storyteller moving into these areas of education? And in what ways is your approach somewhat perhaps different to other broad-based approaches to education?
The whole thing started, I think, when we were in the Nilgiris, and I used to see people, somewhere we had lost touch with traditional knowledge of medicines, of curing.
I should just interrupt to say that when you say we, you mean your husband Raju,
yeah,
who's an IAS officer who works with Katha and is a partner in your
very
enterprise.
Much so. Raju's been so much part of this whole journey that we've taken together in Katha. So we've done all the things together, really. When we were there, and then when I came to Delhi, and I thought that I couldn't do anything much, because I didn't belong to Delhi, I belonged to Tamil Nadu. Completely stayed over there, studied over there, did everything over there. So I felt that maybe I couldn't do anything, and then I started Katha in 1988, and it got formally registered in 89. When I was bringing out a little magazine then. It was an I then. It's a glorious we now.
Tamasha for
Tamasha.
Children, yes.
And little children used to come and say, "Didi, kal kitab chahiye padhne ke liye, kitab chahiye." And I didn't have any Hindi books with me, and we just had these few issues of Tamasha. So bought a few copies, and in the garage I opened up this little place so the children coming could read books. It seemed like, when I saw them reading, they would not be able to read the matras. So they will read Badal, and then they may read the next word, but supposing they feel that there's a word cut in, they will not be able to read the matra over there, because they are just reading this bit of it. And then the I going up, accepting the matra over there, and then coming down. That was very difficult.
Was this an aspect of visual literacy or
I think probably it is the way in which children are taught to read, Rajiv. So it seemed that's how the whole.
I mean, is it just a cognitive thing? Is it an intellectual thing? Is it?
I think it is both. It is a cognitive thing. It's also that there are no parents. There's no reading in the home per se, because we are talking about children from non-literate families. I'm not talking here of children who come from third, fourth, fifth generation schoolgoers and educated people.
But this was an aspiration that has led you to creating 5, 6 schools in different parts of India. You've had several thousand of them who've been through this the stream of education, who've graduated from school, or from just wanting to make people
Actually,
literate
we
to read
didn't want
stories?
to expand at all. The idea, I think it is the philosophy that matters to Katha. I think it is the quality that matters. And we know that many times quality and quantity do not go hand in
So
hand.
what is this philosophy as far as education goes?
Philosophy.
I mean, we had so many philosophers, education, Tagore, Krishnamurti, a whole range of people who've written about it. So what is
Well,
Gita Dharmarajan?
no. No, that will be making it too big. But really, we've been working very closely with the community. And it's a community of 150,000 people. And we've been doing it for the last more than 15 years now. When we started, the idea was that education should bring happiness. And education's end purpose should be happiness. Now, when we really look at happiness, somehow that has got mixed up with personal happiness. So if I go from point A to point B and I become more comfortable, then I am happy. The thing of, a social consciousness, the thing of, saying that I need to take everyone with me, that attitude of, taking other people along, somehow that was not happening. So what happened was, you find that, you have slum clusters and they are on their own, and the other people, all of us are at the other end of the thing, and they become the them, and they are the ones who are, polluting our air and polluting our water, and, they come and steal our things. So it's always the they. But when you look at the potential that those children have and what is it that they are capable of doing, then it becomes a different story altogether. When we were looking at them as a them then, and now I see ourselves working together, because unless we are looking at the threefold way, we all know this, Rajiv. Unless the child, the school, the school, the thing that we are running over there, the Katha school, for instance, the teacher and the child and the community, if all of us don't work together, and there isn't a threefold way of looking at things, a coming together, a kind of a partnership, if we don't have that, then we find that education does not have that larger goal. So we say in Katha, it is an uncommon education for a common good. We talk about, the me-we ideology. We say that, the me can go cannot go very far if it doesn't take the we along. And the we is made up of all the me's who believe in the we. So the more we believe in the we and the more we invest of ourselves in the we, that we is going to get stronger. And with it, all of us are going to get stronger. So the whole idea is, it is an ideology, it is very idealistic. People tell me, Geeta, you can't go far with this kind of a thing, because we are living in a world where, I have to make way for myself. Many parents do tell me that, and I do understand what they are saying. But I also think that today, if you're looking at the world and you look at the global citizen, which is the child, I don't think if I'm going to go into the global market and I say that I know my MTV and I know my Beethoven and I know my Madonna, they're going to think I'm anything special.
Tell me, how sustainable, and this is a question that every initiative that's good, well-meaning, motivated and successful in some ways is asked, and I'm afraid that sort of the experience of most of us working in this kind of sector is sustainability, business plans. So what's going to happen?
I know, we get this thrown on our face every time, every 3 years we are looking for partners and they come and ask us, how sustainable, give us your sustainability plan. But we are working with children, we are working in the field of education, and education has always been a state subject. It has always been funded by government. And I really believe that there is a stake for government in this, and they are equal stakeholders in the work that we are doing. How much money they are able to bring into it is a different question, because I think we do have a lots of children to educate. So government also is hamstrung. So I don't think we can say that government should come in and help every non-profit organization, but definitely I think they are a very strong partner in the work that we are doing in Katha today. They've given us the space, for instance. We get funding, a little bit of funding from Government of India. I
should sort of say that I think you get 30-40% you're able to raise from your own revenues and the work that you actually do.
The thing is, you see, Rajiv, when we started the publishing program, it had nothing. It was very shaky, fragile, very fragile. I'm a full-time volunteer for the organization. I've always been a full-time volunteer. I do everything possible for the organization. And that was the only foundation on which the whole organization started. So you can see that, our needs have been very small. We've not been, we are not large spenders. I think I learnt it from my mother to make the rupee go as far as possible, we stretch it. But our publishing program has been successful. And today, that supports the education program. In fact, when I met the income tax officers and they said, aisa kaam aap nahi kar sakte hai, why are you sort of selling, you are a non-profit organization and you shouldn't be selling. I said, it's not going to any individual. That money is being plowed back in and it is going for the education of children. And what I think the Katha model is not always to go out with a begging bowl to people, not always to depend on large funding, but to say that every book that we sell is going to put a little bit of money into our programs in which we believe. So Katha has a lot of these programs. We are looking at teacher education. We believe that teacher education is absolutely important in today's India. We have got a very strong program of teaching learning material, because again we believe that it is very necessary to have strong teaching learning material which is gender sensitive, which is sensitive about the equity and other issues like that, environment for instance, ecology. So we have our own teaching learning material. We are looking at, for instance, the need for exciting fun books for children to read in English and Hindi. And what we have today is a program in English which itself is not highly priced. We are looking at a book which is selling at 95 rupees, but that is subsidizing the Hindi volume, and the Hindi is being sold at 30 rupees, which a non-profit organization can afford. We are saying that we will give it to you at the price that you can afford to buy, because I have seen children, Rajiv, they sit and for 5 minutes they are just touching the paper, which is imported art paper, and they are getting pleasure out of it. They are getting pleasure out of color. And what do we give them? What do we give our rural children? We say, Jane do, let's give them, something which is 2 rupees. Let's give them something which is on, ordinary paper. And they are the ones. We have to catch them into reading. How do you catch them into reading? How do you get the magic of the story to them?
So many sort of, stories to tell, so much to do. What about Geeta and Raju's story? what's
Raju's story.
Well, we'll just stay with Geeta's story. You're here on this program. So how would you like the story to end? What might be the last paragraph?
I don't know. I think it's been a happy life. I think I always think, Rajiv, that there is somebody out there who does things. I think, I truly believe that none of us can take credit for whatever we have done. I don't think it is our doing. I think if you are doing what you are doing and I am doing what I am doing, I think it's because I always believe that, I have not been made into a cockroach which everyone will want to stamp out of the way. I've been made into a human being. I've been given a mind. I've had parents who educated me. I have a very, very generous family into which I came. We are very orthodox. I think but I've been given the freedom to do whatever I want. And I think then it should be for a larger good. It has to reach out to as many people as possible. And if I can do that, and if somebody up there gives me the power or gives me the ideas or uses me as the conduit to reach out, then I think I'm the happiest person on earth.
Well, great. Well, at least down here on planet Earth, we celebrate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.